What is up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. My return guest today is Dr. Chad Kerksick.
Hey there, man. How you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
So, had you on about 5 months ago or so, somewhere around there, to cover some research that you were a part of publishing on the timing of ergogenic aids and micronutrients on muscle and exercise performance. And there was so much info to cover, we didn't get through all of it. So you're back to go over the second half of that study. So catch us up on how life and everything has been since we last chatted.
Man, you said 5 months, and God, it's been that long. But that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it has been that long. I mean, and then we're kind of right here in the throes of this wonderful year of 2020. So, like everybody else, my year's been quite a bit different with the university. It was, we were in a full-time academic term, and it looked like summer around campus. I mean, because the parking lots were halfway full, and a lot of the buildings were empty, and it was honestly, it was really kind of sad. You don't really realize. I'll joke a lot of times. There's a lot of times that students suck the life out of you, but you really do realize when they're not around as much, you don't get to interact with them as much, that there's a lot of positive interactions that I think you grow to count on a little bit, and that was missing. So that part of it was definitely unfortunate. The lab's been busy, and we've been working on some studies that we've been working on for a while, because from about March until August or so, our lab was closed down. We were busy because we were trying to get as many people through as we could, but the social distancing and requirements and things like that kind of forced our hand on those aspects. So, but it was a good semester, and yeah, so I'm excited to be on the call. I think of so what I told you, we have kind of had like a fun little update. So the last time we talked, we covered caffeine, and I think I'm sure that I talked about a study that one of my master's students at the time, Patrick Hardy, he's working on his PhD at Texas Tech now, but since that time, his paper's been published. So that was really cool. We got that paper out. It's in Frontiers in Nutrition, so you could easily. So for people that like caffeine and like this notion that when we ingest caffeine might impact our performance a little bit, it was nice to get that paper out, because there's been a couple of studies that have shown some aspects of different types of endurance exercise performance, but there really hasn't been much that has examined the timing of caffeine relative to resistance exercise performance. And because the type of stress that exists between a resistance-based exercise and an endurance-based exercise it's different. I mean, there's much more mechanical stress. There's a tremendous amount of neurological impulse that has to, kind of go through every forceful repetition. Whereas, there's just the long, draining, prolonged aspect. You can actually get, substrate depletion with endurance fatigue, and in addition to to all the kind of neurological fatigue and wear down. So we wanted to see if caffeine could impact it, and it did. So it was kind of neat. It was neat to get it out there.
Nice.
So definitely thought that'd be kind of a neat little segue. But yeah, this has been a topic that we've, Sean Arendt, who's a professor at South Carolina, great dude. If anybody hasn't had a chance to listen to Sean talk, he's always entertaining, very knowledgeable. And we've done a couple of projects now, just kind of covering nutrient timing as a whole. So he was one of the authors on the timing position stand for International Society of Sport Nutrition. And so Sean and I just published a book chapter together. NSCA just came out with the National Strength and Conditioning Association just came out with a new edition of their sport and exercise and nutrition text. So Sean and I did a chapter on that. So we've got some timing things that are kind of sprinkling around out there. So
nice. Well, he's on my list of potential guests.
So. Yeah, he's fun. He's fun. He's high energy. He's a lot of fun. So And then I think of, just this week, Darren Candow, who's a great creatine professor up in Canada. They just published a paper that looked at basically giving creatine during a workout against the placebo. And I think they saw some improvements in performance. The thing, if I was talking to him, I don't know if it was really truly a timing study. They didn't have a creatine group that took it in the morning, like away from the workout. So yes, they gave it during, but of course, I didn't really read the abstract that closely either, but just based upon the comments and things like that, I think it was just two groups during exercise against the placebo. So in my eyes, as much as just a creatine study as it is during like a peri nutrition delivery type of a creatine study. So there continues to be a lot of different work that's floating around out there, and I think you could even, if you look at it pretty broadly, I mean, you can even think of nutrient timing as things like intermittent fasting. There's a lot of people that just feel like, and honestly, it is. If you're manipulating when you're eating and you're working out and sleeping and doing the other things, that it's definitely going to send your body through cues of energy surplus and energy deficit, and there's going to be signaling mechanisms that are going to fire up in response to all of that. So I think it'll be interesting. So I think the next 10 years is, I think we're going to continue to explore this question. People really like it because I think it's something that they can feel like they're doing specifically for a certain purpose. It's like, I'm going to take my beta alanine here. So what do we have left to cover?
Gotcha. So we've got to cover iron, calcium, sodium bicarbonate, and beta alanine.
Yeah. So I tell you what, if we do it in that order, iron and calcium, if you look back, so this article we published in 2019. And just a nice little review article where we just kind of summarize the literature. I think I mentioned before, we were going to include all of this content in the big position stand, and those things are massive. And it was, hundreds of references, and, it was too long to begin with. Nobody really wants to read a document that long, so why make it any longer? So we pulled it out and published this paper separately, and it's gotten a lot of traction. But, calcium and iron are definitely two nutrients that a lot of people be like, really? Timing? Like those? And I got to be honest with you, there's nowhere near enough literature for it to be something that, oh yeah, you absolutely have to do it. It's one of those things of more of, when you search through and you use keywords like timing and various, dietary supplements and nutritional ingredients, and these studies pop up, then you kind of look at it and you're like, I'll be darned. So the iron was very, very limited in the sense that, if I remember, my memory serves me right, there's not even really a whole lot of human work that's showing. So there's been a couple of animal studies that shows that potentially when you're ingesting iron, that it may impact kind of your iron absorption and your iron metabolism. But there's, as I said, there's, I definitely, at the time when we wrote it, I don't think there was any human work that had been done. So even if that's a year and a half, 2 years now, so there hasn't been a whole lot of human work, even if there is one paper or two papers. So I would always encourage listeners or students or anybody else, you always need to take that information with them in a good bit of caution, good bit of skepticism. It doesn't mean that the animal work is bad science. That's never the way you should interpret that. It's just more of, there are absolutely scenarios where there's some species-dependent responses to various nutrients and administrations. And so, so when you read that part of the paper or you listen to what I just said, just understand that, the data's there. Maybe it'll work in human, maybe it won't. And I think we have to keep kind of dancing around with that. If we move on to calcium, it is also very underdeveloped in the sense, and from a literature base. And really, we're looking at more of, can the timing of calcium impact the changes in different bone, either absorption markers or bone resorption markers. So, we kind of, our bone minerals are it's a very dynamic process. It's just, where we're constantly mineralizing that tissue and making it hard and calcifying it and kind of growing and supporting our bones. But then in certain times of needs, our body can actually suck those minerals back out of the bone, and obviously that's not a good thing for various reasons. So there was some papers that had kind of examined when calcium was ingested, did it positively impact um, bone metabolism, I guess, if you will. And again, very limited work. It's usually done in kind of older populations, maybe 50 years plus or things along those lines, because again, bone health for older women, older men certainly becomes an very, very important consideration.
Preventing osteoporosis.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Because we've always kind of looked at bone health and metabolism. We typically, females peak bone mass is generally right around their mid-20s. And then it's kind of traditionally it was always viewed to be just kind of like this long, slow decline. And depending upon your nutritional status, environmental exposures, various types of drug use, legal and otherwise, food intake, exercise, that would kind of impact the extent to which you lost that bone as you got older. So, but we've learned a lot more, and there's some other medications that are out there now, and there are certainly some indications that might be able to definitely either flatten the curve or potentially actually kind of increase bone mass a little bit. But I think definitely, this is, for a human performance athlete, a peak performance type of an athlete, again, calcium timing, there's not much popping up in the literature to suggest that it's going to impact different kind of angles of performance, and so forth. But again, so there's, with the studies that we cited here, is mainly looking at cyclists. And the reason why I think they're looking at cyclists within an exercising kind of population, cyclists in some respects, like their upper bodies don't get a whole lot of loading. If they're on the bike for 3 hours, I mean, yeah, if you're going up or downhill, you certainly might get a little bit of loading, but you're not getting a lot of loading. But you're
all in the legs.
Yeah. So it's actually, it's a really, really fascinating look if you start to look at their bone health, because their bone health in their legs, it's like they're like apes. I mean, they just have their huge, a lot of bone mass, and then typically their skeletal structure on their upper body is fairly diminutive. So and it's, if you like physiology, it's just it's a pretty classical loading response. You load up the legs and the bones get bigger, the muscles get bigger, and you don't load up the upper body and they don't get bigger, and a lot of times they get smaller. But that's one of the reasons I think why they look at cyclists, just because you can do an endurance model with them, and then there's been some other papers that have kind of shown that bone metabolism or bone status with cyclists, might be an area of concern. And I think in general, there was some very preliminary evidence that the timing of calcium may help with bone health along those lines. So, but again, really not a whole lot of literature to support it. And it's kind of a different outcome as well too. I think a lot of times when you get into this nutrient timing and performance piece, you're wanting to know things like time to exhaustion, or repetitions to failure, or did it increase strength, or did we get bigger, or did we lose more fat? And with the calcium angle, those weren't really the outcomes that were being looked at. So some of those traditional outcomes of sport nutrition studies, but it just wasn't the piece. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons why maybe we haven't seen as much about it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So related to what you just mentioned, calcium is required for muscle contraction. Calcium plays an electrolyte role as well. So it's just interesting that it sounds like you're saying calcium is not a limiting factor when it comes to exercise performance as much as maybe some people make it out to be.
Well, no, and I think so that answer is going to be hidden under kind of several layers of context. So I
Mm,
think, I think in particular when we look at like a heavy, we look at like heavier, like resistance training models, where we're moving very heavy loads, or you're doing relatively heavy loads for repetitions to failure. That excitation contraction process that leads to muscle contraction, calcium is critical. I mean, the process simply does not happen without calcium. So that part of it alone, every single muscle contraction, we have to have enough calcium, and we have to have an appropriate amount of calcium handling. So I absolutely, I definitely don't want the listeners to think that, well, calcium's really not that big a deal. It's not that important. I think in general what we see is that if people are generally following a diet, and they're getting enough calories, across the balanced array of foods, that they're typically getting enough calcium in their body to help support a lot of these functions. So then supplementation on top of it doesn't really ping the needle much more in terms of muscular performance. When
gotcha.
we hear about calcium within health and nutrition, I think the overwhelming majority of those conversations are focused in on like bone health. Uh,
Hmm.
and that's where, I mean, the calcium's role within bone is beyond reproach. I mean, it's unquestioned. So I think that was just kind of what they were looking at. I think, the other part of it that was interesting about the calcium related things, because I know like there was one study where, they gave a standardized dose, before somewhat prolonged cycling, about 60, 90 minutes. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I mean, a really pretty good effort on a cycle. And they found that when calcium was given beforehand, that basically bone marker metabolisms were improved. Like there was just a better acute status of kind of, a bone metabolism. Now, does that mean that they're going to build more bone? Does that mean no? It doesn't mean any of those types of things. But it certainly, it does. I guess we're just saying that in an acute fashion, that when you ingest calcium, it might be something that can lead to improvements in various outcomes. And I think so with this, you'd have to be very, very careful of not to like overinterpret it, because we have so much more, I think, that we need to learn along those lines.
Hmm. The other thing that I was thinking of related to calcium was, um, I don't know, maybe back when I was in college, it seemed like there was this huge push to add calcium to a lot of uh, like yogurt and other dairy products to like boost the calcium, because perhaps the idea was, oh, people aren't getting enough calcium, especially women aren't getting enough calcium, and that's what's, causing bone issues like osteoporosis. And then um, I don't know if it was while I was in college or maybe later in grad school when the idea, uh, I guess, became a little more popularized that, you know what, maybe we're adding calcium, and the addition of calcium isn't really beneficial. Like, they're people who are perhaps at risk for osteoporosis who are increasing their calcium aren't showing any positive benefits. The issue is you're not stressing the muscles to absorb that calcium to increase the bone mineral density. Is that accurate? Um,
I mean, so I think, building more bone, and this is not, it's not, definitely not an area I would consider to be like a wheelhouse, if you will, but just coming from an exercise physiology background, and there's, there should be a lot of interest in any individual who wants to improve their bone health or maintain their bone health in resistance exercise. I mean, I think, and I think, again, if we would kind of, you know, start to, I don't know if stereotypes the right word, but kind of like put people in profiles. I mean, generally, older women would be kind of our number one group of people that would, that you'd really want to kind of get focused in on as far as certain types of exercise and so forth. And then older men, and then probably kind of women, and I think particularly like female endurance athletes
Mm-hmm.
can create a scenario, where they've already have, because they're, so again, like an endurance athlete, they have to harvest so much energy when they're out running the mileages that they are, or if they're training for triathlons, and that just, I mean, the body needs energy, and it needs energy in the form of food. And obviously, if you're not getting enough of it, so and athletes present with a relatively low energy availability, meaning there's not a lot of energy left to perform physiological functions outside of what they're eating. Then that creates situations where that person's body, has to find minerals, has to find protein, has to find, and so we kind of think about, so that's where we can, we talk about exercise, I think, with calcium and with other minerals, and with making sure that we're getting enough of it, because if there's these other stressors that are taking place, it's just going to create a level of probability that's not necessarily that individual's favor, about being able to maintain bone health.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I mean, fortification of foods within nutrition, I mean, that became, I think, fairly widespread, through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and things like vitamin D and calcium and iron.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really because, I think, a couplefold, the values overall in large segments of our population were really kind of lower than where I think public health experts wanted them to be. And then also, you take things like vitamin D. I mean, if you're not outside and getting some sun exposure on a regular basis, then food's it. That's the only way to get it. And we really don't make, we really don't absorb vitamin D really that well from
Mm-hmm.
food. That's why it's just trying to get, so that's where there's some fortification there. I think with calcium, in particular, like calcium supplements, there's, they've definitely learned that certain types of calcium supplements absorb and are more bioavailable than others. I'm not an expert on that. I think it's the citrate version, calcium citrate, but I could be dead wrong. And if I'm wrong, don't skewer me on it. But we also we also know as well that, like, consuming consuming a calcium supplement with food helps to improve its bioavailability. And typically, sources of calcium from food versus a supplement are much more bioavailable than the amount of calcium found inside a supplement. So that I think all of these types of things kind of led to nutrition policy decisions to kind of start kind of fortifying foods, various foods with different kind of with those different minerals. Yeah, so I think, because I mean, calcium and iron, those are, I mean, if an athlete's doing a pretty good job with their diet from an energy intake perspective, and then they're not getting all their energy from just one type of food, they're eating somewhat of a balanced diet. I would say the majority of athletes are going to be okay as far as, are they getting enough iron? Are they getting enough vitamins and minerals? And then, so that's kind of the masses. But then a lot of times, we want to talk about the extremes. We want to talk about the fringes of things. And now I think, it kind of goes back to, well, what groups of athletes are going to be at a little bit higher risk? Well, it's generally not going to be like a strength and power type of an athlete. I mean, and I think the reason being will be because, like, on the bone health side of things, if they're doing all of this loading, they're jumping and running and sprinting and lifting, and they're propelling their body and throwing implements, like, that just requires a tremendous amount of force loading through the skeletal system, and it generally, but then they're typically not burning the massive amount of calories that a fairly a serious endurance athlete is going to burn. I mean, they'll still
Hmm.
burn through some calories, but generally speaking, I mean, a strength and power athlete, and I mean, outside of their practices, their training sessions, I mean, it's 45 minutes to 75 minutes for most people, you
Hmm.
know, whereas, I mean, competitive endurance, people, I mean, they're out, I mean, they might be running for, I mean, an hour and a half. They go on long training runs. They might be out there for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and
Yep.
I mean,
No breaks.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
just and the biggest thing that I always like to make students stop and think about is, there is no breaks. It is legitimately, it's seven, if it could be 13 to 18 calories a minute times however many minutes forever. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like for the whole time is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Whereas like, you can take so many different team sport, strength and power, variable intensity type athletes, and I mean, I love those sports. Those are the sports that I played. So I'm not taking anything away from them, but you have to look at them energetically. They're very different in the sense that there's typically, even a sport like soccer, where they're moving constantly. You know, I mean, and soccer is probably the example that we get the closest, with kind of the different energy demands. But you take, I mean, sports, I mean, baseball, softball, I mean, American football, those sports are just energetically, they're just a different beast.
Hmm.
And it's important to, and, so I think students, people really, once you start to think about it, I think it can help people get a good handle on, really just how much energy they should be eating. And that's really kind of a big focus that we're going to try to kick off in the next year or so, is just trying to do things to help like young female athletes understand how many calories your body needs, how many calories you're burning during a workout, and then try to get on how many calories you're eating. And then it's simple math. And then,
Yeah.
and that way, instead of kind of lecturing them and you can just say like, look, these numbers should minimally be equal.
Hmm.
And that's it. You don't even need to say, and yours aren't. Like they're going to know, oh, well, wait a minute. And this is what this means if this number is above this number or below this number. And that's where I think, but all of this stuff kind of, that's how endurance athletes are a little bit different. So,
Yeah. So
particular.
I don't know if you know this, but you just pitched my book. Thank you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Good. What's your book about?
The self-reliant diet. It's
Okay.
how you
Yep.
calculate your energy needs and how you track to make sure that you're coming in where you need to be.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
well, and Kevin, I mean, man, you're open up you're a ball of wax here. I mean, I mean, that is the single biggest thing that every single trainer, health coach, diet coach, if you're working with somebody from a health and physique or just a health perspective, I mean, they've got to know how much they're bringing in, and they got to know how much they're burning, and they have to realize that they're going to be woefully wrong. Like they're woefully wrong. It is scary, but you have to be committed to wanting, because it's so important to get better at it,
mhm.
because then you can start to manipulate. If you really want to see a change, then you understand the implications of eating a certain type of food in a certain type of amount against not doing a workout or doing a workout, and it's just those things day in and day out that people they've got to win those little battles. um, I mean, it is. I'm personally I mean, calories in versus calories out. I mean, I'm a big advocate. I don't, I'm not. I would generally tell my people, that's 85% of the problem,
Mhm.
90% of the problem. I mean, I get it. There's these beautiful, numbers models that are being generated by different people to suggest that there's other important considerations beyond calories in versus calories out, and I mean, I accept those, but my perspective would be, let's not sit here and talk about this other little area that we don't know what the contribution of it is. Like we'll all recognize, yes, it has some level of it belongs in the conversation,
Hmm.
But I'm saying that its sphere of influence might be the size of a golf ball, whereas I'm saying calories in versus calories out is like a stability ball, like a Swiss
Yeah.
ball.
Oh yeah.
That's how I would tell people to, so it's like if so you got to get that part of it figured out. You have to.
Yeah.
So
That's it's funny that you bring that up, just because I have, some interactions with people on social media, and uh, just recently, someone's basically said, "Hey, I posted something about, like the most important priority is to figure out what your calorie needs are." Like, so I use the analogy all the time that it's like a budget. Like, you want to put some money away into savings, you want to save up for a trip to Disneyland. Like, you have to know how much you're spending and how much you're making, and you've got to know this uh, you know, on a daily basis in order for you to make these
right,
appropriate thing. So basically, online, someone said, there is no scientific rationale for programming anyone's diet via calories. And I'm like, what are we talking about? Just because uh, your idea of a calorie equals a calorie doesn't make sense because of things like the thermic effect of food or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You're just going to scrap the whole thing, even though we have tons of studies, metabolic ward studies showing with extremely high precision. They know if they give someone this many calories, they lose weight. They know if they give them this many calories, they maintain weight. And if they give them this many calories, they gain weight. And yet people will just throw that out like it doesn't exist. It blows my mind. And it's like, once you understand, like, yes, there are other things that affect it. But like you said, the whole idea, like the energy balance, the majority of energy balance is how many calories am I expending, how many calories do I need, what's my basal metabolic rate, because that's pretty accurate for most people based off things like Harris-Benedict equation, which is that's what I use. There's a ton of equations out there that are pretty accurate. But yeah, people just, oh, I tried calorie counting and it didn't work for me. Well, that's because you were bad at it, and it's a skill. And like you said, it takes time to master it, but it's worth doing. And you're not going to be super accurate at first. That's okay. Be consistent. You can still make a ton of positive change just by being consistent.
right, absolutely. I mean, I go through this every semester, and it's because there's a lot of really strong cases that you can make, and it's just more about helping somebody who's in a position where they want to try to help people. So you're trying to help those people understand almost like the factors that are going to be working like against you, in the sense that somebody might be paying you money to help them lose weight, because a lot of times that's the number one goal. So it's just so that's why we always go to that. And well, that I just like people need to understand that, like, if you tell them to count their calories, like, they're gonna make a mistake. Like,
Hmm.
and it's gonna be, sometimes it's big mistakes,
Yeah.
and you have to have
Like
grace.
30 to 50% of their total calories for the
Exactly
day
right.
mistake. Yeah.
And what I'll literally do, I'll take people and I'll say, okay, so 30% error. Like, you said that you gave me a diet log, we analyzed it. You said that you ate 2,000 calories. Okay, you actually ate 2,600.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the error. So there's 600 calories there that on paper you say you haven't eaten, but
Hmm.
you have. Okay. Like, thermodynamics is not going to just forget about it because you didn't think about it. So it's like, those are things that people, you have to, and so that's where, like, I am a calories in versus calories out, because it explains so much of the variation. And I think a lot of times I mean, the research-based approach, like, we're trying to explain much variability as possible with the, kind of the fewest number of variables that we can. So I
Hmm.
just think that is a key factor. Um, I mean, we could absolutely go and do a whole other podcast on that because, and quite honestly, probably, I mean, a pretty informative one.
Yeah.
So the, so let me kind of, because I want to make sure that we get through this article in two calls, and then I'd be happy to come back for a different one. But
Yes.
so like with sodium bicarbonate, I think we have two left,
Yes.
right? Right.
Yep.
Sodium
Sodium
bicarbonate,
bicarbonate,
and then we'll
beta
finish with
alanine.
beta-alanine, probably one of the more popular ones. Honestly, so like sodium bicarbonate, um, there's it's there might be an effect of timing from performance. There might be. We know that in general, sodium bicarbonate with very high intensity bouts of exercise has a pretty good potential to improve performance. And we're talking super maximal intensity. I mean, sprinting. So it's not just getting on the treadmill and running a mile an hour faster than what you typically do. It's balls to the wall, kind of as hard as you can go type of a thing. So
Yeah.
because right, I mean, sodium bicarbonate
Works as a buffer.
yeah,
Gotcha.
it's buffering lactic acid production. I mean, we have a system inside our respiratory system called our bicarbonate system, and it's most people think it's around that it takes care of about 70 to 75% of all the buffering that needs to take place inside our body. So when we supplement with it, we're just kind of increasing the capacity of that buffering system. Is fundamentally what we're doing. Through that mechanism within our blood is what I'm trying to say. So the thing with sodium bicarbonate is that, I mean, it's gaseous. I mean, it's baking soda.
Yeah.
I mean, basically. So for years it really wasn't that popular because the initial studies, like they couldn't to deliver in the dosage that you needed to. So many people developed gastrointestinal side effects that it just wasn't practical. I mean, people were vomiting. They weren't, like obviously they're not able to run fast when they're sick, when they just don't feel good. So that was just kind of a natural scenario. And then they've kind of figured out some delivery mechanisms, I think, or people have just started taking capsulated versions of it. They take a lot of capsules because it's a pretty hefty dose. 0.3 grams, I think, 0.35 grams of sodium bicarbonate per kg. I mean, so I'm right at 218, so I'm right at 100 kilos. I mean, so that's 30 grams for
Wow.
me a day. I mean, that's and then you look at if you put, hell, even if you put 1 gram in one capsule, I mean, you have to take 30 capsules, right?
Yeah.
It's just like keep on chugging. Keep on going. So like, so you can see these very, very practical reasons why, like, well, I don't want to do that. Or then if they take a big spoonful of it down the hatch, then you get all upset and bubbly and you're burping and then you're like, I felt like garbage. Like, I'm not going to do that. So that's one of the very practical issues. There are people that seem to be a little more tolerant with it. But one of the neat studies that I believe Jason Siegler and his group did, where they gave a standardized dose, but they gave it 1 hour before. They did an exercise about 2 hours before, 3 or 3 hours before, or they gave a placebo. So they gave it, 3, 2, 1 hours beforehand. They didn't see any differences in performance, but the group that ingested the sodium bicarbonate 3 hours before had significantly less gastrointestinal side effects. So there you go. See, so like that's one of the things why, like, it's nice to bring that study up, because timing may not have to be about running faster. It might be about being able to run just as fast as another condition, but feel better doing it.
Right.
So now granted, it'd be a lot more challenging if like the 1 hour pre was significantly better in performance, but gastrointestinal side effects were 3 times worse. Now you'd have a scenario where athletes wouldn't know what the heck to do. And,
right.
But so there's I like I said, but there's been a number of studies that have looked at bicarbonate throughout the years, and I think consistently, when dosed in the right amounts, with the right type of exercise, it's a consistent ergogenic aid a performance enhancement aid, the biggest challenge is the dosing required to get you at the level where you're going to see a performance outcome and not cause significant gastrointestinal side effects along the way. In the one paper that Siegler's group did, they found that 3 hours before was better from a gastrointestinal perspective than 2 hours or 1 hour. So it's kind of a neat little angle on it. And then
that's really interesting.
We get into beta alanine. So beta alanine's been super popular, and it continues to be popular. So now we're supplementing with beta alanine to increase carnosine levels inside our muscle, and carnosine is also a buffer. It's I think arguably one of the most powerful buffers in our body. Some really kind of fascinating things. So Roger Harris, who's like an icon when it comes to sports supplementation, he founded creatine, and he was one of the kind of original people with creatine. He also basically was one of the original people with beta alanine. Roger has this fascination with wildlife, with animals, and he basically identified that like whales that dive deep and are underwater for minutes have some of the highest concentrations of carnosine in their tissue. And you start drawing those connections. Well, it's like, why would that be? Okay, well, if it's buffering acidosis and it's buffering hypoxia, things that make it very challenging for muscles to contract and produce a lot of force with again and again and again and again and again. Well, are there ways that we can increase carnosine? We can't just take carnosine directly, because our blood has appreciable amounts of an enzyme called carnosinase, which breaks down carnosine. So we supplement with beta alanine because beta alanine combines with histidine to make carnosine, and beta alanine is the rate limiter. So we take beta alanine to increase carnosine levels, and that's where. So again, one of the issues, right, with beta alanine is the fact that it causes paresthesia. It causes this tingling, these side effects that can be pretty severe in some people. And I think if you get into some pretty high dosages, for a lot of people, it can get very, very troubling. It doesn't physiologically hurt you. It just makes you very uncomfortable. It's like pins in the. It's weird how I've always been fascinated why it's always like on the back of your neck and the tips of your ears, like around your mouth and your face. It's like it's never like just in the middle of your thigh. It's like, why the hell is it on my face? So that part of it is just and there's people out there that can tell you the reason it interacts with some receptor, and they've figured all that out, but they have found that that again with taking beta alanine at various times so away from the workout bout can kind of help to minimize the paresthesia. So again, our conclusion on that section was basically along the lines of the research doesn't really say that a current time or a timing strategy is important for a performance outcome, but it certainly might help with improvements in reducing the side effects. So the last two are kind of timing strategies to help minimize side effects, but still maintain the performance aspect.
So as long as you're getting a threshold dose, you can break it up, and you're not.
You're actually recommended to, because again, I think the majority of beta alanine stuff, the studies that have been published have used a daily dose of around 6.5 grams or so. But you would never, for God's sake, still take 6.5 grams in one dose. Don't do it. I mean,
I know people who love the paresthesis.
I know. I have multiple people I know as well that would say like that's their signal, that's their cue, like it's go time, and I'm like, it's no time. I mean, I'm out. I gotta just sit down and just not move. I don't like it at all. So So but I think the dosing strategies, it's like, I think it's about 1.5 grams per dose 4 times a day. And then that's, I think it's 1.6 actually, and that gets you right up to. So I think a lot of the initial studies used 800 milligram doses, and that was before the time release formulations kind of started being developed. So they figure out ways how to slow the absorption, slow the appearance of that, which help reduce the paresthesia. So then they got that dose up to 1.6 grams per dose, and they do it. They got to get, and then one of the original studies, let's see here, they supplemented it that at 6.5 grams a day, and I think after 6 weeks they saw, I think like a 60% increase in muscle carnosine. And then after they did another month to 10 weeks, I think they saw about an 80% increase in carnosine from. So you see a pretty good jump within 6 weeks or so. But carnosine or beta alanine is like creatine in the sense that you can get that muscle loaded up with it, and then you really you kind of dive into like a maintenance dose. Like you just need to keep your levels up, and that's where there's just not as much on. I don't really know if there'll be a future for beta alanine with timing. I can remember, like, I probably said that when we talked about creatine before. Like, for me, it's more about just get it in you. That's the battle that I always want to win. If I'm working with an athlete and they want to know, do I take it before, do I take it after, do I take it during? And I just like,
yes,
I don't care. Just take it.
Yeah.
Take it every day. And I kind of feel that way.
Get it. Yeah.
So I think that part of it is an important perspective for people to consider. Beta alanine is a little bit. We're continuing to learn where and when and how it might be ergogenic. It might be performance enhancing. I think it's a little more fickle than creatine. Creatine is you get it elevated inside your body, and it helps in so many different ways. Whereas beta alanine, you've really got to be kind of dialed into some pretty high intensity work. A minimum of, I think most people would say 1 to 4 minutes is what they would say. So I mean, those are exercise bouts that just flat out, they suck. I mean, you're talking about that's like running, running a 1200. I mean, running it's like, it's just. Running an 800, like those are not fun things to do.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, the people that really want to train at that level are, but I mean, for those that are, beta alanine certainly can, we haven't seen as much on the resistance training side of things. We did a nice study with the rugby team, and didn't really see it move the needle much on strength and power performance. And I know there's some work. It functions as an antioxidant, so there's some work being done in the aging populations, and so the beta alanine's got a future ahead of it. But I think within ergogenic performance, it's kind of dialed into some pretty high intensity work for relatively 1 to 4 minutes, or around there.
So those middle distances on the track,
for sure,
kind of like the sodium bicarbonate. That's probably a similar window of where you're going to find some benefit.
Yep. And I think if you think about it, just, energetically, this is what I would, it's like, we start producing high amounts of metabolic waste, high amounts of acid in the muscle, after we've been going hard for, 20 to 30 seconds. And then you pick that up to 40 seconds, 60 seconds, 120, 100, it's like, the body you're not giving the body any time to clear it, to get rid of it. You're just producing massive amounts of it, and it accumulates. And, a lot of our parts of our skeletal muscle machinery, like, they just don't function as good as they could when it's that type of environment. So let's just try to kind of a simple way of looking at it. So anyway, so like I said, the timing strategies has been something we've worked at since the kind of late 2000s, and it's fun. It's been a neat little topic.
Well, thank you so much for coming back on to finish this. So I had a guest on not too long ago to talk a little bit about HMB. So I was just going to ask you kind of your thoughts on maybe why that did not make it on the list? Um,
I don't, so again, this paper, we were really trying to be dialed into timing
mm-hmm,
when we're ingesting it. Not
mm-hmm,
necessarily of should you ingest it or not. It's more about when. Are there reasons why you should specifically ingest certain nutrients at a certain time? So I think that's probably the first thing to always consider with this paper. What our approach was along those lines. HMB has been very controversial,
yes.
very very controversial, and there's no way we can dive into all of that. Because there's certain professors out there that are adamant that it does absolutely nothing, that it's just nothing
All
more
hype.
than that it's all hype.
Yeah.
And I generally feel like for a healthy resistance training individual who's looking to take something like HMB to promote improvements in muscle status, body composition, and so forth. Um, I, I would just say let's pivot the conversation away from HMB and let's make sure that you're getting good high quality sources of protein. Let's make sure that
Mm-hmm,
you're getting a really good high quality training program.
mm-hmm,
Let's talk about, like a whey protein isolate. Let's figure out ways to make sure that you're getting enough protein across the day. Because if
mm-hmm,
you're doing that with good sources of protein, you're going to be getting a pretty good amount of leucine across the day. And I think it's those factors that combine together, which really kind of lead to the outcomes that I think a lot of these people are interested in. Uh,
mm-hmm,
I would, um, I, I think it'll be interesting because there's a lot of clinical research that's being done with HMB, and I think that's important for people to understand with like sarcopenic populations and like
mm-hmm,
elderly populations and people that metabolically are not as good as they could be from a skeletal muscle mass perspective. So that's an angle that there might be some different levels of kind of efficacy along those lines. And then also there's this notion that kind of within the first week or 2 weeks of starting a new training program, that something like HMB might offer some support to kind of minimize protein breakdown. Um, and again, is that something to really hang your hat on? I don't really know if it is, because again, like if you're getting enough calories and you're getting enough protein in your diet in combination with that new workout program, that's going to also be a pretty powerful positive stimulus too. So uh,
mm-hmm,
I'm definitely not the huge anti-HMB. It's a total waste of money type of a thing. Uh,
mm-hmm.
but I definitely think that if I had a group of people in front of me and they were asking about it, it would not be something that it would not be one of the things that I would recommend to them. I'd
Gotcha.
kind of focus their attention elsewhere. I
Mm-hmm,
mean, I authored a fairly large review article for ISSM where we reviewed a lot of different supplements, whether timing or not timing, and we covered HMB in there.
mm-hmm,
And the other authors felt pretty strongly that it still had some really pretty good potential. And again, it's a really good lesson on, you have to get dialed into making sure that you're all talking about the same outcome, the same population, the same outcome, the same. Are we apples and apples on this?
mm-hmm.
Because if you're talking about skeletal muscle hypertrophy within a resistance training program, I don't necessarily know if HMB is the thing that people need to be directed towards. But in
Mm-hmm.
other types of populations or applications, I think there's a little bit more of a window for some potential. But yeah, HMB's had a rough road here in the last 10 to 15 years or so. Um, yeah.
Yes,
So
that's the truth.
yeah, and so I've not done an HMB study. Rick Kreider, my master's mentor and PhD mentor, he did one of the first studies on HMB when he ran the lab at University of Memphis, and think they did 3 grams a day, and the needle didn't move very much on the study that they did. It was I think 6 weeks or so. I don't remember how many people, and there's some notion of a like a free acid version versus like
Liquid. Yeah.
the type of formulation might make an impact. And
Yep.
and again, see, I'm not an HMB expert, so I don't know. I do know that how it's formulated can make an impact. And again, like you have to. That's one thing that I've learned to appreciate a lot more in the last, I would say, 10 years is that it's you can put it in your mouth and get it into your GI system, but that does not mean that a appreciable amount gets into the tissues that you want it to get to. And
Right.
so I think companies have worked with strategies to help improve the bioavailability of a lot of different ingredients, HMB being one of them. So that's where I think, and I'm not saying this will be the case for HMB, but I think there could be many nutrients that they're first pass through science. Maybe they're not really that impressive, but maybe it's just because of poor bioavailability. So they package it with some other nutrients, or they change the formulation of a little bit, and bioavailability goes up by a certain percent. And now with this new formulation, it has a little bit more efficacy. So so that's where I think we see some differences with some of these different ingredients.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
I'm always interested in hearing people's perspective on things like HMB, just because it's it's one of those very, very interesting things in the industry that has a lot of it's got a lot of baggage.
Yeah, and because like I go back to like reading that, like I remember writing that section in particular because I was well aware that there were going to be people that were gonna pounce on whatever interpretation we took on it, and they didn't disappoint. Um, and but
Letter to the author.
yeah, I mean, I guess those things happen a lot of times in Facebook, or Twitter, or those, and that it is what it is. But I think where like there's studies out there that show that I mean like with there's a group in Brazil that had done a couple of pretty well done design studies that that looked at HMB with whether it's performance outcomes, or maybe it was like some body composition outcomes, and they saw some favorable changes. Again, that does not mean that it's better than something else, or that it needs to be used in all applications. And I think that was that was kind of some of the issues I think surrounding it. So yeah, but anyway, well,
context matters for sure.
It really does. And I've honestly, with my lecturing and education, that's probably one of the things that I try to really get people to understand a little bit more. It really does. I think more so people want to try to speed science up, and read an article and be like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Here's the paper right here. It's peer-reviewed study. It says
black and white.
It's everyone says that this is the best of the best when it comes to science, and it just so you want to speed up that interpretation, and many times it just doesn't. There's too many other things that need to get dialed into it. But I think we have to be open-minded to. You see one paper, and then 2 papers, and then 3 and 4, and then we have a little bit more strength to our outcomes, and then we can kind of decide on some things. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, I think the article and you coming on and explaining each of the specific supplements and micronutrients kind of shows like, yeah, there's nuance here. These things work when they're used at these specific doses to achieve these specific outcomes when it's in the realm of this type of exercise or this specific activity. So that's one of those things that it'd be really nice if you could write this paper that just says, hey, all of these work. Doesn't matter, what type of exercise you're doing or when you take it or whatever, like these work. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So providing us with with some clear instruction and nuance there is much appreciated. So thank you so much again for taking the time to do this. It's been great.
I'm happy to do it. I'm glad we finally got on the call. So
For sure, for sure. Well,
but
I can't wait to have you on again to discuss calories in, calories out, etc. That'll be fun.
I'll be ready for it. It's a good topic. I think it's a good topic. So
yes. Well, I'll have to send you a copy of the Self-Reliant Diet so you can do a little review. Tell me what you think I got right and wrong, and
sure.
Always looking to make it sharper, improve my craft, and if there's anything I got wrong, I want to know.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, yeah. Thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it.
For sure. One more time for us. Can you tell us your Instagram or how people can follow you?
Yeah, so I'm not super active on social, although I am. I am the current one of the vice presidents for the International Society of Sport Nutrition. So I kind of stepped into that role here in September of 2020.
Nice.
So Joey does want me to become a little bit more active on social. So, we'll have to make sure I throw out some hashtags or something with the podcast, and be sure and plug at the ISSN.
Yes.
But because that's the organization's handle for Instagram. But I'm Facebook is just Chad Kerksick, and honestly, so is Twitter as well as Instagram. It's just at Chad Kerksick. ChadKerksick.
Perfect. Alrighty, y'all. Well, go follow the ISSN, everybody. Go follow Dr. Chad, and yeah, thanks for watching and listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.
All
Adios.
Right. See you later. Goodbye.